So you all are troopers for being here at the last talk of the day. I know it's Friday, it's late. I am tired. I've got my 8-year-old with me, so he's been running me ragged all week. So thanks for all for coming. So I'm Deb. I am an accessibility and XR specialist. So I've been in the XR field for 6 years. I started out as an ancient historian, doing 3D models of ancient historical sites, putting them into AR and VR to see if we could actually learn from that. And then I got started in the accessibility field because one of the applications I was working on wasn't accessible for me. I had vision issues and I couldn't zoom in. So that really was the start of my accessibility career. So we'll go ahead and get into the topic about, can we even make AR, VR experiences accessible? So let's go ahead and, now that you know me, we'll do a quick introduction to the topic. So I'll give you some definitions about disability and accessibility. Then we'll go into a really brief summary of today's topic. Then we'll talk about XR accessibility in general. AR, VR is an assistive technology, which is my favorite thing. Then we'll go ahead and talk about the future of AR, VR accessibility, and we'll do a quick Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and go into our introduction. So disability, what is disability? Well, actually there are 3 types of disability. There's permanent, temporary, and situational. So permanent is like me. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed at the age of 12, and that's not gonna go away anytime soon unless they figure something out medically, which I'm a little bit hesitant about. Then we have our temporary disabilities. So that's like me when I broke my arm. I couldn't use my mouse, and I was only a keyboard user for about 6 months because I had some issues with the cast. Then there's also situational. So this is anyone at any time. So when I use my augmented reality application inside of a sunny area, I can't actually see what's going on because the contrast isn't there. So the key point is that anyone, anytime, anywhere can have a disability. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Now, the ways that we can view disability are actually these 2 different models. There are multiple more, but these are the 2 main ones. So the first is the medical model. So it says that disability is related to an individual's body, disability might reduce the quality of life, and needs to be treated by medical professionals. Now let's take our friend here on the screen. So let's call this person Mike. Mike is a stock image, so the story is fictional, but it is based on people's real life events. Mike loves to go motorcycle riding. He's only 18, so he just got started working. He works on the 2nd floor of an office building in New York. Inside that office building, there isn't a ramp up to the door. And the problem is, Mike just got into an accident. He has a broken arm, he has a broken leg, he's in a wheelchair. The doctor said, get out of the hospital, you're good to go to work, but he can't actually get into work. So the medical model would say, well, Mike has a disability. Once it's done, then he can go to work. But the social model, which is our preferred model of looking at disabilities, is that disability is a restriction caused by the lack of inclusivity and accommodation in society. So it's that societal problem. The building should be accessible for Mike to go into work. He should be able to go into that 2nd floor, have an elevator, have a ramp. He is not the person that is at the issue. The building is what's causing him to be disabled. So now that leads directly into accessibility. So accessibility is making products as usable to as many people as possible. It's an equal access to products, regardless of if the product is digital, physical, or a mix of the 2. So some of the lovely phrases that we have are like progress over perfection. We can always add little bits of accessibility into our experiences. And Meryl Evans, who just gave a talk with Ashley Coffey, loves to say this phrase, so I highly recommend looking into their talk as well as you look into the recordings. And the next one is nothing about us without us. And Ashley and Meryl just also said, nothing about us, period. We're everywhere. People with disabilities are everywhere we have. So make sure that you include us in everything that we're doing. And accessibility is essential for some, but it's useful to everyone. So we want to make sure that we're making accessible products straight away. So let's go into a really quick summary of our topic. Now, we can add some bits of accessibility into XR experiences, but the current technology does have inherent limitations. Now, specifically, I'm thinking about the weight of the headsets and the addition of input and output devices, which is really what our assistive technologies are. So now we know the summary, now we know the definitions. Let's get into our topic today about XR accessibility. So the first thing we need to think about is our users. Our users are everyone, whether we have a disability or not. So thinking about people with, say, low vision, blindness, or they're using augmented reality inside of a sunny area, and you can't really see your screen. Now, if we're thinking about things about like mobility, we're thinking about people who may be in a wheelchair, they have muscular dystrophy, or we're thinking about people who just broke their leg, or we're also thinking about people who might be sitting in a small apartment. I'm moving from a 2,000 square foot house to something that's 750 square feet, and I don't think I'll have room to walk around in my VR experiences anymore. So that's going to be my temporary disability inside of virtual reality experiences. Then we also want to think about people with different audio experiences. So things like deafness, hard of hearing. I don't know about you, but inside of the conference, the expo hall is really loud, makes it really difficult to understand things. So we want to make sure that we're keeping everyone in mind as we're going along. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing, we need to include everyone. This is the most critical step of the whole process. We need to make sure that we always, always, always include people with disabilities when we're creating these experiences. We want to design with people with disabilities and not for people with disabilities. Nothing about us without us, nothing about us, period. Then how do we even do this? How do we include people? Well, we've got to start thinking about our senses. So we have, well, depending on which theory you subscribe to, we have anywhere between 5 and 53 senses. I like to keep to the 7 that are listed here, which are visual, oral, haptics, sound, taste, vestibular, and proprioception. So we always want to make sure that we're using a mix of our senses inside of our experiences. And then, of course, once you know about all your senses, you know about people, what do you need to do? Join communities. There's a lot of us out there who are working in XR accessibility, and we would love to help you out. So join the communities like XR Access, or XRSI, or the A11Y VR meetup, or the W3. There's a lot of communities out there, and you'll find also that once you start going to one community, you'll see those people over and over again inside of everywhere else. So now that we know which communities to join, we also need to start looking into guidelines. There are some out there right now, but there's also going to be more done in the future. So we can look right now at the XRA developer guidance, specifically looking into chapter 3 of that one. And then there's also a ton of resources on the XR Access site. And we also have Oculus virtual reality checks, but it is worth noting that these don't include audio description at the moment, but hopefully in the future, they'll become more robust. And then we also have PETE, which has the inclusive hybrid work toolkit, which was just recently released. So I do encourage everyone to check out that one as well, and the W3 as well. They're a great resource to have all of these different guidelines. So now let's talk some specific guidelines. So thinking about visual, we want to make sure that we're displaying text on a background. It's really difficult to see, especially in augmented reality, when your text is placed inside of your physical world, but then your background is very, very busy. So we want to make sure we have that text on the background and at an appropriate distance. And we want to make sure that we have descriptions, our audio descriptions inside of our room, or in our 3D objects in a room. Users need to know where they are in an experience, as well as what they can interact with and what's around them. Then we also want to look into color contrast. Now, for web and mobile, the W3 does say color contrast can be lower than 4.5 to 1. You can have 3.1 for large fonts, but honestly, I wouldn't go any lower than 4.5 to 1. You want to make sure that your contrast inside of your experience is as high as possible, because you're putting things onto reality, or you're putting things into a busy environment. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind, because regardless of who you are, making sure that you can see something inside of VR and AR is really important. Now, next we want to look into our text size and typology. And this is actually just a setting that you can change. And it's really easy to do inside of Unity or inside of WebXR. And then we also want to make sure that we can turn off background noise and content. And we have good sized interactable objects. We don't really want teeny tiny things. And then we also want to allow users to change verbosity and time delay of when they're interacting with objects. So we know that we have the 3D content descriptions on side of our objects. So as you go along and you're looking at a scene, you're able to see, okay, I want to say, wait 5 seconds as I'm looking at an object to be able to tell me what that object is and how I can use it. That way, a user is able to understand the experience and go at their pace. And we also want to make sure we're thinking about audio descriptions. Now, this is one of those areas that needs to be explored much further, but at the moment, really thinking about things about how many different audio tracks you can have. So you can have a normal mode, a verbose mode, a really quick mode, allow users to go at their own pace. And we also want a time delay of when people speak. So if I'm looking around a VR experience, I want to make sure that I'm able to look in a direction and then have it read to me what I'm looking at. And then we also could do something like having an in-person guide. So someone going along the experience with you and telling you what's going on in the experience. But again, that's one that really needs to be researched more to understand how we can do that. So then our audio guidelines. So users need to control how they perceive the audio. So you can do audio as visual indications, or you can do it as haptics, or you can do it a mix of the two. So you need to be able to let users control that setting. And we need to make sure that our captions are displayed appropriately. So we can move our captions physically if it's in a VR experience or an AR experience to suit where the user needs to be able to see them. And then we also want to be able to customize it. So thinking about things like font size, color, our text typography, and our location of where they're at inside of our space. And then we also want to start thinking about sign language and hand tracking. How can we incorporate that into experiences, especially now that hand tracking is getting much more popular? And we want to make sure that transcripts are available for users. So people who are deaf-blind, that's the only way that they're going to be able to experience the experience. Now, one of the things that I was talking with haptics about recently was that they're actually using their controllers, their haptic controllers, to look to see how they can do Braille inside of VR, which I think is a fantastic way to do it, because you can also do, a lot of times when people grow older, you get neuropathy or you can't feel your fingers, so that you can't read Braille anymore. But you could do it in other places of your body if we have that haptic control. So that's a really exciting area of research. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have mono audio and spatial audio. Not everyone can hear in both ears, so we want to make sure that we're able to change them to the person. And we also want to be able to change the volume of the speaker, the background, and the effects, and all independently of each other and the main volume control. So then let's go into our mobility guidelines. So we want to make sure that we have an accurate scale of the user. Some of us are really tall, some of us are really small. Some of us maybe have only one hand. We want to make sure that we're able to capture all of our different users. We also want to make sure we have seated, standing, and room scale experiences. Like I said, I'm moving from a giant house to a small apartment. I'm not going to be able to walk room scale anymore. So having that seated or standing experience is going to be super important for me. So I'm a little bit selfish in this area. And we also want to be able to move our camera position with our controllers, not physically moving around our head, because we can't always do that. Think of when you're using VR in an airplane. You're not always able to look directly behind you. And then we also want to make sure that we have multiple inputs. So think about keyboard, controllers, your hands, your eyes, switch devices, BCI, your voice. There's a world of endless possibilities right now with the technologies that are being developed. And we always want to make sure that we have a good target size again for people, so that way they don't have to directly pull something. And it's a huge superpower when you're using an experience and I can just point and get it in a general direction and the object comes straight to my hand. I love when that happens in a VR experience. And we also make sure we have a one-handed mode and allow users to choose their handedness. So now that we know all of these guidelines, let's talk about my favorite topic, which is XR as an assistive technology. The true power of AR and VR is the convergence of the technologies. We can use the camera, the microphone, external sources, IoT devices, cloud computing, all to understand the world around us and put it into an accessible way that people can understand, in a way that they can easily digest. That is the true power. So when we're thinking about different assistive technologies, some of these are being done now, some of these are in research, and some of them haven't even been thought of yet, but we need to keep experimenting. So let's think about vision first. You can use augmented reality for depth perception. One of the things when you see someone with cataracts especially, who are trying to go downstairs, have you ever seen a yellow strip on your stair? That's actually to help people with low vision understand where the next step is. Because when you have cataracts, it's very blurry and you can't understand where one step goes into the next. And we can also use AR for visual searching. So you go into a supermarket and say you need to find a specific pill bottle in the 300 bottles that are in the Target aisle. How do you do that if you can't see very well? there's a lot of time processed right now because you can take a magnifier glass and you can look individually at each one. But with AR, we can use computer vision and we can spot it straight away. And we can also use AR and VR for navigation. So one of the things that happens with people who are with different disabilities is that they get a, we'll say, tour guide as they go into a new office location. And that can sometimes take away independence. One of my friends who is blind says she never wants to be with a tour guide again, so she refuses to move companies because she hated that that person would treat her like a baby, walk her around the building, tell her exactly where the door was, and then had her open it up. She was like, if I can just use virtual reality to do that so I know exactly where the door is before I go in, and I can use augmented reality to help me find that door, I will never feel like that again. And that is a super great use case. And now we can also familiarize ourselves with the place before going because of that. And we can also use AR and VR for magnification. It's really easy to do inside of, especially when we start thinking about glasses and our phone. And we can also get auditory information about our surrounding areas. So if a door is broken because the step is broken on the staircase, usually we put a sign up there and we lock the door. But what if someone forgot to lock the door? And what if someone who's blind or low vision goes to that door and tries to go through and falls right down the steps? With using augmented reality and computer vision, you can get all that information straight away, and it helps people to avoid that situation. Now let's go ahead and talk about audio. So we can have real-time captions and translation. I went to Germany 2 years ago. I didn't speak German, so when I was on the train, I had no clue what was going on. But with augmented reality, I would have been able to see exactly what was going on, and I wouldn't have missed my stop and been on the train for 30 minutes too long. Now, we can also give important noise notifications. So if someone's yelling at you to stop because there's a hole in the ground or you're not multitasking and you're not looking where you're going, getting that information straight away is super important. And we can also use it for sign language translation. So this is something where I would love to learn how to sign. I have communities that are helping me, but if I can use an application and someone's signing and I can see what they're signing, and then they can also use that same application to translate whatever I'm saying into sign language, that's a powerful use case. And we can also use it to find the best acoustic space in a room. A lot of times inside of rooms, there are different places that work for different people just because of the way that the acoustics work and the way that the building is formed. So being able to spot that right away without having to go to that meeting room 30 minutes early to find where that sweet spot is with the acoustics is super helpful. And then let's think about mobility. So we can go somewhere that is inaccessible to us. When I first got started in AR and VR, the man came to the stage, he was in a wheelchair, he was a paraplegic, and he said, "Thank you so much for putting ancient Rome into VR, because I'm never going to be able to get my wheelchair onto an airplane and go to Rome myself." And I was like, this completely changed the way that I saw things. We can do things that are physically impossible. And then we can also practice moving through a building before we go there. I don't know if you know this, but sometimes the entrances with ramps are really far away from the main entrance of a building. And being able to know that before you go to that building can cut down your time wasted finding that entrance by at least half. And then we can also use it for physical therapy. We're seeing use cases where people use virtual reality to give people who have limited mobility the cases to see their arm stretch further inside of VR, which helps with their physical rehabilitation. And of course, with cognitive disabilities, we can also think about them. We can try experiences without failing. This allows us to go into places without any repercussions and being able to get adjusted before having to do the real thing. And we can find spaces that suit our sensory needs. If someone has PTSD and they need to sit by a pillar, going into an office building and understanding exactly where that seat is and if it's occupied or not using AR is going to help so much more than spending 30 minutes out of your day trying to find that space. And we can also use visual search. I have an 8-year-old. He has ADHD and autism, and he cannot find things on a busy carpet or inside of a busy room. He's 8, so he throws his toys everywhere. And I say, "Ian, you need to make sure that you put your book away." But he can't find the book because he can't do the visual processing. So using augmented reality, he's able to find the book and then go, and we don't have so much frustration. We'll put it just that way. It's so much easier for me as a parent and him as a child. And then we can also reduce noise around us. So if we have that information where the book is, we can reduce the clutter around it so it's much easier to pick up and put away. And we can also do more interesting ways of timekeeping. And we can also use VR and AR for therapy, for meditation, and relaxation. And of course, a lot of this is happening now, but it also needs to extend into our future work. So we always need to design inclusively. We need to always include people with disabilities whenever we're doing this work. We also need to start looking into assistive technology that can be built on the device or easily added to the device itself. At the moment, there's a lot of bickering. Well, who's responsible for putting a screen reader onto a VR headset? Is it the person who's building the device itself, or is it someone who's doing a software? We kind of need to stop that and start looking at it together as a collaborative effort. And we also want to start looking much more into user customizations. So thinking more about the room scale, the standing, the sitting, your locomotion, your rotation. How do you do this if maybe you don't have a certain sense? Or how do you do this if maybe you have a different ability? And we also want to make sure that users are able to change their experience to suit their need at any point in time. And we should have some global settings that propagate into the app. So if on my headset I'm saying that I need 120% text zoom, that should go into every application after that. So I don't have to keep changing it every single time I go into an application. And we want to make sure that we have strong guidelines for design, development, and for testing. So with that, I would like to thank you all for sticking with me for the last presentation of the day, and we'll open it up to Q&A.
Yeah. We have time for one question if anybody has one. Yeah, go ahead. We have a microphone up here at the front.
You have a quick point about physical therapy. Can you just elaborate a little bit about accessibility?
For physical therapy? Yeah, so one of the use cases that's done at Stanford, so people with different limited mobility in their arms, so they can maybe move it, say, 10 degrees. You're able to put it on a VR headset, and you see your arm actually move like 30 degrees. And when they do that, they see that the people who have the VR experience are actually able to move their arm then 15 degrees next time. So we're seeing a lot of great progress inside of that way. I also have friends who use VR for pain management. So she says whenever she goes to the hospital, she just puts on her headset, she escapes her reality. So she's actually able to then do her treatment much more effectively.
Awesome. Well, let's give a round of applause for Deb Mears for showing up and giving us this really fantastic off-the-cuff presentation.